Okay, my name is Bradford Rand. I'm the president and founder of the Cybersecurity Summit. Thank you so much today for joining us at the Chicago Cyber Summit here. And we are excited to talk about, obviously, one of the hottest topics, which of course is ransomware and resiliency, to trust or not to trust. So I'm going to quickly roll around to all of our speakers. They'll give a brief introduction, and then we will go into all of the questions that we have received in advance and have our subject matter experts here go ahead and attack those questions. So with that being said, let's just go ahead and start introducing people. Michael Gorelik, CTO of Morphisec.
Hi, Bradford. Okay, yeah, nice being here. So as you mentioned, my name is Michael Gorelik, Chief Technology Officer for Morphisec. Morphisec, founded 8 years ago, is a breach prevention company focusing on runtime, supply chain, and exploitation, mitigation, visibility, and prevention.
Okay, Murtaza from BugCrowd.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Mortaza Hafizji. I'm on the BugCrowd team, a leading crowdsourced security solution company. I'm on the product marketing team here, and excited to have the conversation on ransomware and resiliency today.
Terrific. Greg from BlackBerry.
Folks, this is Greg Yurchak. I'm out of Dallas, Texas, and I work at BlackBerry. And there, I work a lot with our global incident response services. So we see a lot of ransomware. And then I also have a social media presence called Cybersecurity in 60 Seconds that covers ransomware and other cybersecurity topics as well.
I'm still waiting for the cyber phone to come out from BlackBerry. I'll be waiting. Okay, Mark Harris from Proofpoint.
Yeah, no, my name is Mark Harris. I'm a cybersecurity advisor for Proofpoint. Joined just a few months ago. Before that, I was on the other side of the fence, where at Gartner, where I as a senior director analyst covering endpoint protection, email security, and a lot of calls on ransomware. Been in the industry 25 years, so been around the block and talked a lot about ransomware.
Okay, wonderful. Dan from Pantera.
Hi, I'm glad to be here. So yeah, as you mentioned, I'm Dan Blankenship with Pantera. Pantera, for anyone who doesn't know, is a platform for automated penetration testing and security validation. So we help enterprises identify gaps in their security controls that something like ransomware could sneak through. My role is as an engineer working with managed service providers to help them augment their pen testing business using some of our automated tools.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dan. And Paul from A10.
Yeah, I'm Paul Nicholson. I run product technical marketing at A10, talking about TLS visibility, DDoS protection, and application delivery.
All right, and Idan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Idan Cohen, Senior Cyber Threat Intelligence Specialist at Cyber6Skill, where we're kind of looking to reduce risk for our partners, which include monitoring for ransomware groups, initial access brokers on the underground, as well as providing vulnerability intelligence on what threat actors are exploiting.
Okay, thanks for those introductions. And with that being said, we're going to do a lot of rapid fire questions here so we can get to as much content as possible. So just try to share, and your best advice, best practices and so forth. And let's just get right to it. Where or how are companies most vulnerable to a ransomware attack? Michael, let's go with you there first.
Thanks, Bradford. So being the first, I'm sure I'll miss something in the way. So let's separate first who is being most attacked and who is being most vulnerable. Most attacked are obviously the industries, financial, healthcare, those that have PI, right? Private information, PCI, PHI. Essentially, they can lead to a long-run impact. We see that on financials, there's an impact only in 2022, an average breach impact of $5.97 million, increasing from 5.72. For financial is 10.1 from 9.23. So those are being really attacked, but the vulnerable ones are usually those that are lower IT hygienes, those that do not apply deep depth defense, believe that one agent can save it all. And we see, according to reports from like IBM, the previous one, that even with applying full EDR solution on place, putting perimeter wall, you still are reducing time to identify a threat from 235 days to 181 days. So those are still 181 days you are vulnerable with a threat inside the network. Yeah, so really deep depth defense, thinking forward, but those are the organizations that are mostly vulnerable.
Okay, and Dan, would you like to add?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of how companies are the most vulnerable to attack, I mean, in my experience, humans are the weakest link in security. But beyond that, I'd say that poorly implemented or poorly configured security solutions are a massive vulnerability when considering ransomware attacks. I mean, I've personally seen companies spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions, on security solutions, state-of-the-art firewalls, best-of-breed EDR solutions, what have you, only to either deploy them incorrectly or just fail to enable them to protect themselves effectively. So think about like EDR or XDR, whatever DR you like. Is a big offender here, right? Ransomware's ultimate goal is to capture data on an endpoint that can be used for extortion. So we need strong endpoint security, right? But often EDR agents are deployed in an observational alert only mode, usually with the goal of getting them tuned properly, so that the policy can kind of find the sweet spot between security and productivity. But the trouble is many organizations never move beyond this, right? So they never find a configuration that works for them. Or you make so many policy exceptions that you allow work to continue, and you end up defeating your own security controls. So I guess my point here is you don't become secure when you sign the check for a security solution. It has to be implemented properly and tested to verify its efficacy. And until then, your enterprise can be considered vulnerable to these kind of attacks.
Terrific. Well said. Greg, BlackBerry?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say one of the places that companies really are going to find themselves vulnerable is financially, where they think they're covered with their cyber insurance, and we're finding out more and more they're not going to be. I mean, all these costs of ransomware, whether it's paying the ransomware rebuilding environment or lost business, or as a specialist like IR or outside counsel you have to bring in, all those costs are getting paid somewhere. And it's not just businesses. Insurance massively underestimated how exposed they were. And whenever this happens, they go back to reading the contracts, and they're denying claims for people not doing exactly what was in the contracts, to the point that this is not, hey, you used the wrong IR, but it says, hey, you're using multi-factor, and customers are saying, we are using multi-factor. This is a major case in the courts right now with one of the big insurance players, and the insurance company is saying, you weren't using multi-factor enough. You were only using it on firewalls, so we're not paying any of these costs. This is going to be a big exposure for companies who think they have coverage behind them, not necessarily the case.
Gotcha. I mean, we can do a whole panel, I'd like to in the future, just on cybersecurity insurance, because as with car insurance, they never want to pay. It's all about finding that one sentence. Well, you didn't do this, and therefore you're not going to get paid, even though you were attacked. Idan?
Yeah, so I think, really, there's a number of areas that Dan touched upon, like misconfigurations of systems. And I also think, like, alongside that, there's also legacy tools that hasn't been touched, unpatched systems. But I think another area as well is, sure, you need to protect your own house, but you're also vulnerable to those third parties as well. Where ransomware groups can kind of expand their reach, targeting those. So also making sure that the controls to those third parties are also kept tight. So I think really the third parties, and we heard a lot of media coverage of certain organizations this year, and kind of what happened after is kind of a major area there. So really, it's also making sure that the controls with your third parties are set.
Okay. Mark, final thoughts from Proofpoint?
Yeah, I think, I agree with everything that's been said. I think that, the attackers have only got to find one way in, and the defenders have got to try and block all the entry points. But unfortunately, there are too many sort of open doors. Still a large number of attacks come through poorly configured remote desktop, and with the shift to working from home, that just got worse. And it's really easy for ransomware gangs to do the equivalent of a Google search and find all the companies that have got those open RDP ports and it's the open door. So it is the the weakest links, those organizations with lower maturity, with fewer controls, maybe only doing monitoring 5x8 rather than 24x7. It's those organizations that are most vulnerable and easiest to attack.
Gotcha. Okay, now we're going to discuss the evolution of ransomware. And to clarify, what we'd like to talk about now is how has ransomware and bad actors evolved over the last year? And what trends do you see upcoming in the future? Why don't we kick that off with Paul? What's the evolution
Okay.
here?
Yeah, so I mean, ransomware continues to be a threat. If you Google looking for the threats, you're going to find lots of examples of breaches. One of the things we're seeing is with our security research team publishes a threat report every year to 6 months, and in that we're seeing the number of potential weapons and the numbers of malware pieces of software out there, for example, using botnet agents, has greatly increased. We see over 15 million potential weapons, for example, for DDoS out there. And one of the trends we've also witnessed is the time to attack has actually gone down. So, for example, with the Log4j, after the CVE was published for it, we saw scans on our honeypots immediately within a day. Right. So we're seeing the hackers are actually evolving to take advantage of these vulnerabilities, much like Dan and Idan and some of the other people were talking about as an answer to the last question. So that's a big trend there, and that's only going to increase. And then people are automating these types of attacks out there. So you have to basically close down, both the human loopholes, but also make sure you're looking at encrypted traffic channels to make sure you can inspect that traffic and also block any bad actors by default as much as possible using AI and other threat intelligence means as well.
Okay, Murtaza, the evolution.
So, I mean, everything that Paul said, I think, from a specifics perspective, I think ransomware or ransomware as a service, I think it's like a business, right? It's capitalism. It's like, if it's working, let's invest more in it and let's get better. Like Paul just mentioned about automated tools to do ransomware. So I think from a trends angle, it will certainly continue to evolve and continue to get smarter and better. I think on the positive side, I will say that, I think there's also some recognition by the regulators or governments in some way to have some kind of collaboration to address some of these ransomware attacks that are happening. For example, the rebel group where the US, the UK, and Russia, which is, I know it's rare, but, kind of shared some information and were able to catch and bring to justice in that case. So I think the CFAA and others, where I think governments are recognizing how important it is to address ransomware. And from a trends from the positive side, I would say that we will see maybe some more collaboration cross borders to be able to address it.
Yeah, that certainly would help. Idan?
One of the things that Mortaza mentioned is like the groups operating like real businesses. One of the things that I've always find fascinating is that, yes, they really do operate like real businesses. Real businesses also have PR teams. So one of the trends that I've seen is the certain timing of attacks. So we saw the targeting attack right before the Super Bowl in San Francisco, saw another claim of an attack against a security company right before one of their annual conferences. There's a very big PR game. If it's not just threatening organizations by putting their data out on dedicated leak sites, it's also utilizing different tactics to reach out to individuals as well. We saw one group that's also letting them know one of their third parties was targeted. So there's that PR aspect and that reputational, that brand reputation area that has also been looked at. And I think that's another way that we can expect to continue seeing more pressure put on organizations with these groups that are operating like legitimate businesses, really pushing PR to the forefront. In other situations, we've also seen it backfire in the context of the Russia-Ukraine conflict as well, where groups coming out in support of one side and then receiving a backlash also from the underground community on that as well. So that's also been interesting to see.
Okay. Mark, some thoughts on the trends that you see?
Yeah, I think, you know, the evolution of ransomware it has changed over the past couple of years probably, and you know, the introduction of a sort of double extortion, triple, quadruple extortion. So rather than just encrypting the data, it's stolen first, and you know, a lot of ransomware gangs are actually putting less effort on encrypting the data because, you know, people are getting better at backups, so that they are getting better at recovery, but you can't sort of unpublish your data. So there's a lot of emphasis from those gangs on data exfiltration, and the encryption is just almost secondary, and it's becoming that way. And I think the other thing that we're seeing is they're shifting left in the techniques. You know, the techniques that are being used today are those that were being used by nation states probably 2 or 3 years ago. So a lot of it is now human operated. They'll find a way into the network. They'll move around laterally. They'll escalate privileges. They'll identify that data, steal it, and then encrypt it. And it's far more sophisticated than, you know, the original self-replicating ransomware that we saw a few years ago. So the techniques that are being seen now from the sort of very sophisticated nation state are probably going to end up being the techniques used by these money motivated ransomware gangs in the future.
Gotcha. And final thoughts from Craig from BlackBerry.
Yeah, I mean, I almost wonder if we're in a ransomware bubble. It's so predominant right now. I mean, most IR is ransomware. Most malware being sold on the dark web is ransomware. It just is predominates like nothing else has in the last couple decades. But at the same time, as it says, they're working as businesses, and we have triple extortion opens up a whole new level of threats that maybe we're not in a bubble. Maybe this is just the beginning. I will say, I think a big change we'll see is now that we're seeing the time shrinking before people deploy ransomware, before threat actors do in an environment, because EDR is getting so good and threat hunters are getting so good, that time's coming down. We always say, oh yeah, but they're doing it even quicker. They're staying ahead of the curve. They're not really, because they're not getting the quality of data they wanted. So a lot of customers are saying, you guys didn't get anything valuable. This is leading to, yeah, the whole triple extortion, what's in there? Can I go after these third parties for something as well? But it's leading to sort of this subcategorization of data, and it's no longer going to be pay $350,000 to get your data back, pay $4 million to get your data back. It's going to be like, do you want this type of data back for this much money? Because the people are going to start to know what they have, what its value on the market is. If a customer wants it back, they'll buy it. If not, they'll sell it on the market. And the reason the whole extortion by taking things off site has worked so well to begin with is because when it was encryption, customers like, hey, this is a problem for us. When that data has been exfiltrated to an offsite thing, organizations start to think, was this my data, or was this data I had that customers actually owned, and do I have to pay to get this back? So there is value to it. We'll know exactly what this value is over the next couple of years, and you're not going to see this all in one, all at once type ransomware payments.
Okay, interesting. All right, and let's go to our next question. Why and how is perimeter-based security and the trust but verify method becoming increasingly ineffective? How do businesses effectively shift from that to the zero trust model? Michael, let's give that one to you.
Yeah, thank you. Though we're endpoint security product, you know, perimeter is important. Perimeter is important to deal with network threats, with the important threats that go through, and we need to accept that you know, this trust but verify, it's already a kind of a problem. Hey, trust someone, you have this gap of until you finish verifying, you already have an impact. So we see that the threat, the ransomware threat, the groups are penetrating to the perimeter, they are getting to the endpoint, and the endpoint becomes the new perimeter many times, right? So when you are asking about the zero trust kind of question, you see all the companies talking about zero trust. What is zero trust is really is the big question, right? Everyone mentioned we do zero trust, but essentially zero trust is a reduction of attack surface. How can you reduce the attack surface? Because as soon as you do not trust someone, it's not an attack surface. You do not let it get in. Exactly like you do with the perimeter. Hey, I can open it to only specific IPs. In most organizations, you cannot do this really. You can also apply similar deep depth defense approaches to the endpoint as well. So as you need obviously to apply different layers of defense, but hey, control your user access, minimize it, apply zero trust there, right? Apply zero trust on who and what can work with your applications. Apply, you know, again, deep depth defense. You can apply hardening mechanisms, including on the endpoint, and make your IT hygiene appropriate. And as soon as this, you look at zero trust as a deep depth defense, as a layered approach, everywhere, perimeter, endpoint, and in the endpoint itself, there are a couple of layers. I'm sure you will be much less vulnerable than your friend, your neighbor, which will be attacked by the ransomware group. It's all about how more difficult it's for you than the other guy.
Gotcha. Okay, Paul, why don't we finish that thought with you?
Yeah, so yeah, I totally agree with Michael. It's about reducing the attack surface and zero trust. The interesting thing about that is when you look at it, it's not a product. Obviously, it's basically about having policy. It's also something which I feel is definitely a good communication tool for IT professionals to talk to the C-level folks. Because if you say, hey, I just want to enhance my firewall rules or whatever it might be, whichever security thing, they might get turned off. Whereas if you talk about zero trust, it's a very relatable concept. So looking at the shifting landscape with this as well, you can also frame things where the perimeter is obviously the perimeter, but we're also seeing trends where people are using cloud environments. So the security in those cloud environments needs to be the same, and the policies which are pushed out to them need to be the same level of quality and defense as within your local network as we move into hybrid models. There's also things where you can use it to help champion common sense things, like I was saying earlier about TLS visibility. So you don't just allow encrypted traffic in where ransomware could, infect systems, at the network. There's also things where we're seeing it's not just about north-south traffic, but it's east-west traffic, where organizations are shifting some of those things which are typically on the perimeter right in front of the applications, so that they can put in security policies, not just for the external users coming in, but also those internal users who are accessing it as well, to enforce those zero trust policies as well. So there's a lot of potential benefits organizations can employ using a zero trust communication framework as well.
Gotcha. Okay, let's move on to another topic. In addition to implementing zero trust framework, what other security measures can companies take to avoid ransomware attacks? Murtaza, why don't we throw that to you from BugCrowd?
Yeah, thank you. I think with zero trust, and I know my colleagues have already mentioned, not a product and process, a methodology, a thinking, but more than zero trust. And I'll give you an analogy here with zero trust. During COVID, like for the past 2 years, we take Australia for example. When COVID happened, they locked down their entire borders, right? So it was kind of nobody was able to get in. Because it was an island, it was a little bit easier, in my opinion, to do that as well, but lock everything up so nobody can come in. But then what actually happens when you are inside? And in Australia's case, people did not get vaccinated, because there were some opinions about we should or we should not. So that kind of left, and so because of that, there was no really, and people not getting sick because everything was locked from the outside. There was not much herd immunity, if you will, that was created within. But then what happened when Delta came? Things kind of went sour for Australia because they had not dealt with it from the inside. So zero trust is a little bit like that. It's kind of your crunchy outside shell, but with the gooey inside. And if you're not protecting everything, just the outside, you're not really, again, managing it correctly. And I think with ransomware, simple things like basic hygiene. Again, I go back to the COVID example just because I feel it's very relevant. Basic hygiene: wash your hands, wear a mask, cover your mouth if you are in public, or if you're sick, don't go somewhere. Same thing, right? Stay up to date, patch your stuff, make sure that the backups that you have are actually working. Do a restore to make sure that it is working. Maybe leverage some of the cloud technologies where you can do, instead of on-prem, where you can do a version, restore older version. So again, doing all of that. And finally, I would say is raising employee awareness, right? Within the organization, make sure and I think Idan mentioned earlier, the weakest link is your user. Make sure that they are educated, do trainings, etc., and raising awareness are some of the steps that you can take.
Okay, great. Dan from Pantera.
Yeah, thanks. So I could actually take your COVID analogy a step further, or at least pile onto it, which is to say testing, right? You can get vaccinated, but we still need to test. It does not make you 100% immune or whatever percentage we would like to be. Security is no different, right? We need to test our security controls against these types of attacks, ransomware, what have you. Zero trust is kind of the buzzword right now, and companies are flocking to it to get it implemented, and that's great. Obviously, the the concept of least privilege is powerful and getting locked down. But how are we really gauging if this concept was implemented correctly? I mean, have we achieved zero trust, or better still, let's assume that we have gotten to this kind of dream of a zero trust state of being. Is it actually effective in preventing or containing attacks, right? The same can be said for defense in depth, or really any security concept. You don't know if it's working until it's challenged, right? You can shadow box all day long, but until you get in the ring with an opponent, you don't really know how effective your defenses are. So I suppose I would say that implementing zero trust is a great idea. People should do it, obviously, but organizations need to validate and not just assume that their security controls are safe, right? You need to take that COVID test to verify that you haven't been infected. Maybe you're a carrier and you don't realize it, right? And you also want to make sure that implementation was done correctly. So whether it's done with self-serving, but whether it's done with a tool like Pantera, or employing a traditional human penetration tests annually, or better yet, more often, you're never really going to know how secure you are against these kind of attacks unless it's challenged.
Okay, great. In addition to implementing zero trust framework, what other security measures can companies take to avoid? Let me say, we've already covered that. So let's go on to, is it easier for large enterprises to implement zero trust and defend against ransomware? But how can smaller security teams have limited resources to do so? There's quite a lot of small and medium-sized companies in our audience today. So Murtaza, what would you recommend there to the smaller security teams that are out there?
Sure, I think so. I would say that it's not easy for the large enterprises either, right? Because I feel the large enterprises have their own digital transformation initiatives, and the challenge between business and security being able to work together, being on the same page, and even security, what to patch, what's out there, what is my attack surface, what does it look like? I think it's hard. But I think in my opinion, I think it's actually easier in a way for the smaller organizations, maybe a few in the audience today, because they are more aware. They might know more about their attack surface. What do they have out there? What are their priorities? What is kind of their again, what digital assets do they have out there? So tools like attack surface management, vulnerability management are again available to help organizations. But then also, I know this is not a sales pitch here, but there's talent and crowdsourced security solutions out there that help, again, companies, smaller or even bigger enterprises, to find vulnerability. First, find what is important to them, find the vulnerabilities within them, and then go out and provide steps to remediate and put it in their life cycles.
Gotcha. Idan, you wanted to chime in?
Yes, I think there's plenty of paid tools that can assist you. There's also things that you can do as well to kind of mitigate that risk as well, whether it's setting up MFA or kind of limiting access to different peoples in the org. Why should somebody in HR have access to certain systems? So making sure to segment that out. On top of that, for certain organizations, they're also able to get a vulnerability assessment from CISA as well, which they provide as a free service as well, to kind of help figure out, maybe then going from there, what paid tools you should focus on as well.
If you can get on that list, it's usually reserved for large scale infrastructure and so forth, but it is available to everyone and at free of charge. Actually, not technically free of charge, because all of our taxpayer money goes to it. So it is there as a resource. And we had our keynote today from CISA, and they're just a great organization. Let's move on to the next question. If you're a victim of a ransomware attack, what options other than paying do you have? How do you mitigate the damage of an attack to recover afterwards? Mark, why don't we go with you?
Yeah, I mean, the starting point has to be, you've got to have a plan. The worst thing that's going to happen is you get hit with ransomware and you're running around pulling out plugs and you've no idea what to do. So the whole goal of preparing for ransomware is assuming you're going to get hit.
Yes.
Be prepared. Minimize the probability, and we've talked a lot about that. Minimize the impact, and we've talked about zero trust and isolating data, and then minimizing the recovery time. And that comes down to the plan. Knowing who to talk to, knowing who's going to do what. Even if you are going to pay, who's going to do that. So I think it is about being prepared and having a plan and executing on it, and that will minimize the recovery time. I've spoken to people that have run tabletop exercises, and the marketing and the legal department have argued for 90 minutes on what statement should be published on the website as part of that tabletop. One of the things that came out of that is they had a whole bunch of pre-prepared statements, which saved a hell of a lot of time. So being prepared, practice, know what you're going to do, and that's going to minimize your recovery time.
Sounds good. Greg, let's go with you.
Yeah, as Mark says, people really should be doing tabletop exercises. We're actually starting to see some cyber insurance companies require that customers do it at least once a year. Even if you're just doing it internally for yourself for an afternoon where you pull people together, nothing outside of an actual event prepares people better for that event. And if you do use outside people, as Mark said, you get all kinds of expertise. Like they're going to say, hey, what if the media's caught wind of this and they call? Who deals with this? Or can this company even deal with with paying someone in cyber currency? Do you guys have a process for that? So there's good reasons to go with outside parties, but at a bare minimum, please at least put something together yourself once a year.
Sure. Michael, we haven't heard from you in a little bit. Victim of a ransomware attack, what are the options that you have other than paying? How do you mitigate damage? What's the recovery in your opinion?
Of course, if you do not pay, you need obviously to contain as much as quicker as you can. Obviously, preparation is a key part to this, already mentioned here. But I always like to look at NIST as a kind of a guideline. The identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. It can be a good tool for quicker getting out of this incident, getting out of this event. So obviously you need to identify this event the quicker you can. If you have the agents that deal with the different issues, you fill your gap in the right way, you can minimize this identify time. I mentioned it in the first question, containment as well. Obviously aside of your backups that need to work, great testing example provided before, you can also contain with protection tools, proactive protection tools. It could be deception, it could be tools like we have moving target defense, it could be even your hardening that you can apply. Obviously you can contain an event and minimize the time. So if you take this kind of framework, again, also in the response the same way, you minimize the time, it's already a better posture than you've been before, right?
Gotcha. Since we're talking about that, can you just roll into the MTD philosophy that you have, the moving target defense?
Right, it's kind of a direct line. What we do is moving target defense. Moving target defense is a very different kind of approach. It's creating the attack surface as unpredictable, right? It's in a way attack surface reduction, or obscure the attack source, change it and hide it with regard to a runtime and application kind of runtime when the application runs. So if we look at ransomware, everyone are talking about encryption. Hey, during this talk, we already understand it's not about encryption. Encryption is kind of maybe the final stage. There are multiple stages, even based on MITRE, that happened before. There's the reconnaissance, the getting the credentials. Hey, you're done working on dark web, searching for those credentials, and then you get initial access, propagation, and forward. So specifically, when you apply additional techniques, not just detection that may require playbook, but also prevention. With respect to, hey, let's change that access. Let's change how it looks like. It is unpredictable for the attacker. The attacker suddenly one step behind the defense. The attacker needs to understand how you work, right? And it's become much more complicated. So many times he will shift to the other more or less secure organization. So this is what we do, moving target defense.
Sure. Okay. What are organizations doing that effectively mitigate DDoS attacks from your experience? Paul, we haven't heard from you in a little bit.
Okay, yeah. Well, it's interesting because when one thing Mark was saying earlier was about having a communications plan. So there's two things. One, if you're attacked, and then one, how do you stop being attacked in the first place or make it having an issue? So if you are attacked, being able to have a communications plan and quickly get to try and deal with the root cause, make sure it's not a smoke screen for another type of attack. Maybe there's a ransomware attack or something else going on at the same time, which we've seen before. And there's many examples of. So there's that one aspect to it. But what we're seeing, and taking it back to the COVID analogy, which we were talking about earlier, we're basing in an era of protected and unprotected networks from a DDoS point of view. Microsoft reported a 3.47 terabit attack at the beginning of the year. They reported that after the fact. The network didn't go down. We have customers who, one of our service provider customers blocking 25,000 attacks in a 90-day period. You never hear about it. We have another customer, a gaming company, who was blocking more realistic level attacks, I think, for many organizations, not these massive terabit attacks, but 50 gigabit attacks with 200 million packets per second automatically. And the reason is they thought through their security policies, and they're putting in place various different things to mitigate it, whether it's threat intelligence to block known bad IP addresses, which is effectively crowdsourcing intelligence. They're using artificial intelligence because automation really is the way to go with trying to respond to these attacks, creating signatures on the fly effectively. And then they're also, and relating it back to ransomware as well, they're blocking different types of attacks which are coming in over encrypted channels, which help to propagate command and control bots and other pieces of ransomware. So there's various different techniques out there, but it's really thinking of it proactively to be able to stop being a victim in the first place as much as possible with a lot of these new techniques which are out there.
Sure. Okay. Mark, let's give you questions. What happens if you do pay? What's the customer service like? Are you going to get your data back?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it earlier about these ransomware as a service gangs being.
Yes, it's a business.
It's a business, and their business model is if you pay the ransom, they will decrypt, they will prove that they've deleted the data, because if they didn't, nobody would pay. So
right.
They do provide the decryption tools. They'll even provide tech support helplines to help you run the tools. But the reality is, they may be reasonably good at ransomware, but they're not necessarily the best software developers. So even if you get the decryption tool, it will take a long time to run and decrypt. It may fall over, it may break. And just because they've deleted the data doesn't mean to say that they haven't passed on some of the information to other people. So they will honor their obligations. Some of them do have a sort of fairly distorted set of ethics. There's one
Sure. Idan, I'm just going to throw you one quick question, then we'll go to some final thoughts there. Are there certain types of data sources that should be monitored for learning about ransomware attackers?
Yes, and I'll chime in on what Mark said. So Mark mentioned a certain group, blaming one of their affiliates, for example. Some of the sources where these actors are actually discussing this, we saw this with Colonial Pipeline as well. Oh, it was one of our affiliates, is on their own leak site. So we've talked several times about dedicated leak sites, which is their own mouthpiece, which is very useful for knowing, hey, has my geography been targeted? Has my industry been targeted? Has a third party of mine been targeted? That's one way. Another way is also, just like legitimate businesses contract out certain roles and responsibilities that they might not be able to do, sort of the ransomware groups. So other sources as well would be initial access markets as well, or also providing advertisements for, hey, we need pen testers, or we need somebody else that can assist us with the attack cycle. So I think in terms of data sources, could be the ransomware dedicated leak sites, forums, and different marketplaces as well that are selling access that are also useful for monitoring.
Gotcha. Let's roll into some final thoughts, suggestions, anything you'd like to add. Dan, why don't we start with you? Wrap us up.
Oh, you caught me off guard. I didn't realize we were doing final thoughts. So I guess I could just touch on what I've been hammering on this whole time, which is not defense in depth, zero trust. Everything we've talked about today is important, but we need to also consider testing our security countermeasures that we put in place, right? Take the concept of zero trust in terms of employees. We should also have some level of zero trust in terms of the security countermeasures that we're using, right? We don't know anything's effective unless we test it against some kind of real world scenario, whether that's something as kind of maybe basic as, running, malware or other attacks you're getting from, sources on the dark web, or, more legitimate places in a sandbox against, like a golden image you have for your endpoints, or something more complex like a proper penetration test or some kind of automated method to do so. But until you have that kind of confidence that what you're putting in place can actively protect you from these kind of ransomware attacks, which are, as we've discussed, always changing, always evolving, becoming big business, quite literally, there's no way to know you're secure. We're only making assumptions, and assumptions in this kind of day and age of ransomware are not enough, in my opinion. So,
Right. Okay, Murtaza?
I'd say identify what's important to you, understand the risk level, and go out and get it addressed. And there is help out there, right? All of us on this panel, there is help out there. If you can't do it alone, there is definitely help out there to help you get towards being more secure.
Okay. Paul?
So three things. One, I'd say automation, I think, is going to be the key to security going forward, whether it's AI, threat intelligence, crowdsourcing. Number two, eliminate any blind spots you have. Obviously, assess what's important to you. But for example, as I was mentioning earlier, the TLS visibility, making sure you have visibility for all your security appliances, not just one or two, or when it comes with a firewall. That's very important. The NSA put out some guidance saying, do it well, do it once. So you could do it for many different security devices. And then thirdly, one thing I briefly mentioned at the beginning is because of our application delivery experience at A10, we talk to a lot of customers about hybrid deployments. So making sure you have the same policies that you would expect in your corporate environment in a data center, making sure you have that in your cloud environments is key, whether you're using Oracle Cloud Infrastructure or Azure or AWS, or you're putting it into a new software environment like putting on a containerized environment as well.
Okay, Michael, some final quick thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. So I think much have been said. Really, I mean, we are here representing different layers of security, and the fact that those summits are already increasing the awareness to the ransomware awareness is important. We already see more investment in security, which is good. But essentially, ransomware and breaches are business models. We'll always have this fight, never-ending fight. So the more we are aware, the more we invest in layered security, we understand the gap, identify, very important. I fully agree, 100%. As soon as we know how to identify well and know how to assess risk, now know how to apply a layered approach, we'll be more secure, at least more secure than the other guy nearby.
Okay. Idan?
I think ultimately it's important to know, what are you prioritizing? What is most important for the organization to protect, whether it's IP, whether it's other data sets. So I think a lot of the thinking needs to be, what am I prioritizing as an organization? If especially for a small company, I can't plug every hole. So what do I care most about? And how do I try and really look into that? So prioritization.
Okay. Mark, final thoughts.
I mean, the way I like to think about it, as I said at the beginning, I've been in the industry for far too long, and it used to be, files got infected with good old-fashioned file infecting viruses, and then machines got infected. But now it's the organization that gets infected. The attacker will find a way in, they'll move around, they'll identify the data, etc., etc. So as far as defending, you have to look at the whole organization rather than just individual files or individual machines. Look at the whole organization, and that includes the people. It's the people that access the data, the people are being targeted, people make up organizations. So focus on the whole organization, not just individual pieces.
Okay, Greg, why don't you close us out with some final wisdom from BlackBerry?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I would just say, I mean, we've all seen a lot of people, a lot of organizations go through this. And I mean, well, I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I will say a lot of times when people, even if they pay the ransom and don't get everything back, as Mark says, even if they restore but can't get everything, there's going to be an amount of rebuilding done. And most organizations that go through this do use that as sort of a cathartic process to not just rebuild what they previously had, but hopefully shape things the way they wanted it to be. So even though those first two, paying a ransom or restoring, it does get you information back. The third process, while people hate it at first, generally adds a lot of benefit to them going forward. So I'm not pressing for anyone to go through this, but I'm saying if you do, other people have found it as an opportunity to change how they do their organization.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. For those that are in the audience right now, I certainly implore you to stop by. Most of our subject matter experts that are on this video right now will actually be in the ballroom right next door. So I ask you to go by and visit them and visit all of the booths and test drive their technologies, ask a lot of questions and see what's the best fit for your company. And guys, thank you for sharing your experiences with us at the Cybersecurity Summit of Chicago. And we will, of course, see you with the next one. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bradford.
Thank you.